If you had a microscope and could look at a piece of a leaf, you would see thousands of tiny openings which branch out until the leaf has all of the materials it needs. What happens now?
Welcome to lesson number 5. We're going to have a ton of fun today. I'm going to talk to you about one of my very favorite things in After Effects, which are shape layers, which is kind of like a mini Adobe Illustrator that you have in After Effects for creating geometric shapes and for animating them in really specific ways that you otherwise couldn't really do with imported art. So they're very powerful. We're also going to talk all about animating lines on screen so that they kind of draw themselves on and off, which is a big topic as well and can be a little bit tricky. And then we're going to take it one step further and we're going to work on something very much like your homework. And that is to animate a script font, like a word in script, on screen so it looks like it's writing itself on screen. And this actually has a couple of pitfalls in it that if you've ever tried to do this, you'll realize it's slightly tricky. And I'm going to take you through 2 different methods that I've come up with over the years to do something like that. And I think it'll be very instructive. So let's jump into After Effects and start talking about all of that. So we kind of went over this a little bit with the 25 steps, but I know we were going really fast then, so I kind of have to take it back to the beginning, all right? So I've made a new composition, HDTV 2997, 1920 by 1080 pixels, right, as normal. And up here in my toolbar, if I choose either my rectangle tool, which as you recall, if I kind of click on this and hold down, I have these other tools of other shapes that I can make using this tool. This is kind of like our shape layer tool, right? Also, if you choose the pen tool, you can make shapes with the pen tool as well, sort of polygon pen tool shapes, right? Now those are kind of different and kind of the same. So first let's just talk about geometric shapes that we make with our regular shape tool or the rectangle tool here, okay? So if I click on this tool and nothing else is selected, I'm ready to make a shape layer. But up here, we have to go over some of these little settings again. Right now, this is set to make a 10-point stroked shape with a white stroke and no fill, okay? This little red line obviously means like no color or whatever, right? So the way that we would change this around, if we want, just say to make a white fill, okay? If we click on the word fill, it will open these fill options, okay? And then we do have these 4 options, one of which is no fill, one of which is a solid color fill, and that's gonna be what we want. Then we also have the choices for a linear gradient and a radial gradient, all right? And we'll talk about those later. Let's just look at our solid color for now and hit OK, right? Now that's given us just a kind of generic color here. So let me click on this, and this opens this familiar shape fill color window. And let me go up here. I don't mind if it's a little green, okay? Like a lime green on a dark green. So I'm going to hit OK. So now I can also, with the stroke, I can either dial this down to 0, so now I know that it's got no stroke on it, or I could do the same thing where I click on the word stroke and I could make this none, right? So now it's got no stroke, and even if it's like 100 pixels, oh, no, never mind. If I set that back to 0, looks like when I dialed that up, it automatically put a stroke back on there. You could change the stroke color as well there. But remember, you always want to click on the word stroke or fill if you want to get into these options. In this case, I want no stroke, right? Great. So I've got a rectangle that will be this color, right? And now all I need to do to make that shape is to click here in my window, okay? And if I hold down on Shift, I'll be making a perfect square. And if I don't hold down on Shift, I have the ability to make, you know, a rectangle or whatever other 4-sided shape that I want, which I think would always be a rectangle, right? Or a square, okay? So Shift makes it a square, and non-shift makes it a rectangle, all right? I'm going to make it not a square and just a rectangle, and there we go. So now that's on screen, and you can see down here that it has made a shape layer called Shape Layer 1, and additionally, it's sort of opened up some of these menus or part of this menu under the word Shape Layer. Now, let's just back up here for 1 sec. If I click that down and then open this again, right now I have 2 folders here, Contents and Transform. Now the transform properties are the exact same than we have for any other layer, like we've talked about a million times, okay? Anchor point, position, scale, rotation, and opacity. These should now be familiar to you from the other homeworks that we've done. But under contents now, there's this whole other folder. And in there, we see that we've got rectangle 1. Okay? And one thing about shape layers that I just have to kind of say right away is that the way that they're designed in After Effects involves quite a lot of digging through these sub-menus down here in our timeline. I apologize, even though I didn't make this, but there's a lot of these little tab arrows that we have to kind of twirl down and then twirl down and twirl down, etc. So you have to dig into a lot of little sub-menus, which I think when I first started using shape layers back in 1892 when I learned After Effects, I think something about all those little like pull-down windows and triangles that you need to tab down, I think that really bummed me out. And it took me a while to get used to this idea that this is actually just a really useful way to just hide a lot of information, but just get used to the idea that you're going to have to dig through some subfolders here, okay? And try not to let it bum you out. Because some of these are actually really, really important, and I'm going to go through these now. So under rectangle, you see we have this rectangle path 1, and this is kind of one of the most important little subfolders here. If I twirl this down, we can see now the size of this rectangle, and we've got the sort of, just like with scale, you can kind of unchain these values, or you can keep it chained. So now, just say I want this exact ratio of size, but I want this to now be bigger or whatever, I can dial this up, and it keeps the ratio of those two, the width and the height the same, okay? However, I can also unchain this if I want, and now I can make this smaller or bigger or whatever. I can change the size that way, okay? And I could even, at this point, if I wanted to make it back into a perfect square, I could unchain that, and I could type like 500 and then 500, and as long as I type the same values in the x and y for the size of this, then it will make it into a square, okay? So, or I could make it a rectangle then, whatever I want. I do it there, okay? And these are pixels, by the way. These values are listed as pixels, okay? So theoretically, if I, unchained this and made this 1920 by 1080, I could make it the exact size of my composition if I wanted, etc. But I don't want to do that. So I'm just going to dial this down and dial this down, all right? But that's that. Additionally, you have this other position property that you have here, which lists x and y values, which is a little bit funny because there's actually literally, under my rectangle, just to jump ahead a little bit, under rectangle, you have a transform just for the rectangle that, believe it or not, lists position again here, as well as anchor point and rotation and opacity and a couple things like skew and skew axis that we otherwise wouldn't have. But you'll see here there's another position there, and then here under the main part of the shape layer, not under the contents, but here you have those regular transforms as well. So you might be asking yourself, why would I need 3 different position properties for this one shape layer? Well, I'll explain that in a bit. Okay, I will definitely get to that, but don't worry about it for now. Just looking at the rectangle path, the other thing in here that's interesting is that you have this roundedness, okay? So you can take this and set a rounded value and make shapes like this. Or if this was, for example, a perfect, let me set this down to 0, and if this was a perfect square, just say 250 by 250, now I could actually round this until it became a circle, which is pretty cool because you can literally animate a rectangle to become a circle that way, which is otherwise actually a really difficult thing to do. So if you ever need to do that, I suggest you do it this way. But so that's kind of how a rectangle would work. And then there's so there is this stroke and fill under the rectangle contents as well. It's not actually within the rectangle path, but in the rectangle folder, okay, there's a stroke, which at the moment is, you'll see the eyeball is off because we turned the stroke off up here, right? So there's no stroke information on that, though you could always put that on. And then here's the fill information. And if I twirl down on this arrow, you can see I've got essentially a bunch of things, but I also have a color, right? So I could animate this color, or I could change it, right? I could literally animate it from any color value I want using the stopwatch to any other color value I want. And I could also animate the opacity of this, again, separately from the opacity of the whole layer, okay? So, yes, you have quite a lot of options in here to think about. And this is why, if I were to import a square from Illustrator, I would just have the normal anchor point, position, rotation, scale, and opacity on that. And I wouldn't have all of these additional animation properties, right? So you can start to see right away that actually this offers you some great advantages over Illustrator art, all right? So, like I said before, you also have these other shapes up here. You have rounded rectangles, you have an ellipse tool. This is what we used in 25 Steps to make a circle. So again, like if I just hold down on Shift, I make a perfect circle, right? And then if I turn this off or even delete this now, we can see that under this new shape layer, which I made, which I could, for example, call circle by renaming it, or C-I-R-L-E. I'm always misspelling everything. Circle, right? So now under the contents, we have an ellipse path. Ellipse is just another way of saying kind of a circular or semicircular shape, right? So now we don't have roundedness under circle because it's assumed that it's fully round, right? But we have size and position just like before, and we also have this stroke, which we could put this, if we put the eyeball back on for the stroke, we would see that this would now put that color on. And if I go down here into my stroke, I could choose a different color, just say like something red that we could see really easily. And then if I change the stroke width right now, which is at 0, up to something else, we'll be able to now see that. Of course, we could also animate the color, the opacity, the stroke width, or any other functions of this, right? So that's really useful. And again, we couldn't do that from an Illustrator layer. These are only shapes that we've made in After Effects that gives us this ability, right? Okay, so that pretty much covers geometrics. Oh, and I do want to mention one other thing, which is sometimes really confusing for people, and that is how to make a triangle. Because right now, there's no triangle shape in here, which seems a little bit strange. You think you'd want to have a triangle, right? The way that you'd make a triangle is you can choose the polygon tool, okay? And just make a generic polygon at first, right? Whatever it comes out to be. And then if you look under Polystar, right, in here, now you have a couple other options. You could look at the type could either be a star or a polygon, right? So it could be that kind of a shape. But in this case, to make a triangle, you want it to be a polygon, right? And then, of course, you want 3 points. And that's how you make a triangle, right? So that's like really easy. And you can always make it bigger or smaller, or you could make it kind of rounded, and you could rotate it, etc. So, that's really useful. That's how you make a triangle. And of course, that's also how you make any other multi point polygon as well, all right? And then there is this star tool in case you do want to ever make like a star like this. You just have to kind of work these, you kind of have to work this a little bit and get the inner roundedness, inner radius, I should say, to the right point, and then the outer radius. You can also make shapes just using the pen tool, and those are kind of polygons, right? Those are not specific geometric shapes like a circle or a square or a triangle, all right? And so After Effects handles this kind of in a different way. If I choose my pen tool, even just say if I made like a perfect rectangle, I'm holding down on Shift to make kind of straight lines here. Right? Even if I made like a rectangle here with my pen tool, it still counts as kind of a polygon, non-rectangle tool in After Effects. So if I look at this and I twirl down here, you'll see that under my contents, I have what's now a shape one. So remember here, if I made this with my rectangle tool, I'll just do this again. I'll make this a slightly different color. So this is kind of easy to see at a glance. If I made a rectangle that was basically the same, and we looked at this, so now here's my pen tool, polygon, and here's my rectangle. I'll just label these. I think I said label these, okay, right? Just in case. And I'll even go ahead and make this pink. Great. So my rectangle, under contents, you'll see I have rectangle 1, whereas my pen tool shape, under contents, I have shape 1, okay? So if I twirl down on rectangle tool, I have these things that I was just talking about. If I twirl down under shape 1, I have basically the same thing, stroke, fill, and transform, but here I have path 1, and up here I have rectangle path 1, okay? And if I twirl down under path 1, I will see, instead of having all this stuff, size, position, and roundedness, I have just one property, which is animatable, and that is my path, okay? And this is actually kind of huge, because if I set a keyframe for my path, right, and I move forward in time, I could change any of these path points, like I'm going to choose my arrow tool, or V, and I'm going to shift and select, and now I could make this, into something like this. And so now I've got like an animation that could happen between these 2 points, right? And I could get in here and change all the other points at any other point in time, and now I've got this kind of an animation that happens here, right? And in a way, this is the way to do some hand animation in After Effects, like a little drip of water or something. Theoretically, you could create kind of liquid animation shapes using the pen tool and change them frame by frame or however often you want, and create basic like cell animation in After Effects using the path this way, okay? Which is something that lots of people do. With more complicated shapes than this, right? But animating path is part of a way to animate shapes in After Effects point by point, okay? And you do not actually have that option in this regular rectangle, okay? If I select this and I go to my pen tool, I can't individually like click on these points. What I have here is this kind of a menu where I can change the size and the roundedness and that kind of thing. So that's a bit different, but what I'm here to tell you is you can actually convert from a rectangle or any geometric shape that you make in After Effects if you want just the path animation property, because you want to animate just say like one part of a circle, one point of a rectangle or something like that, or one point of a triangle, or multiple points but separately, or whatever you want. You want more control over how to animate these shapes, okay? You can always right click on the word, let's see if I've got this closed down here, not on the word rectangle, but on rectangle path 1. If I right click on this, okay, or if I control click on it, I can convert to Bezier path, all right? Which, do you remember what Bezier points are? Those sort of like the points that you get with the pen tool. So if I click on this, you'll see now this changes from what it used to say, which is rectangle, and where it used to give me those 3 options of size and roundedness and position. Now I've got the same shape, but I've got a path keyframe property here, and now I can get in here and change these points individually or entirely every single one of them or all of them together or whatever, right? So you've got geometric shapes that you can make using the regular geometric shape tool, right? Or you've got these polygons that you can make with your pen tool. Both give you different animation options and possibilities. Both are really, really strong, but they're different. However, you can convert from a geometric shape to a polygon-esque kind of pen tool shape by right-clicking on it and choosing to convert to Bezier path, okay? So that's some differences and some ways that you can work some of those differences together. The one thing that you can't do, as far as I know, I'm pretty sure, is you can't convert from a path into a rectangle, a perfect rectangle, and get those like roundness options and stuff like that. You can't go that way, but otherwise you can convert from a geometric shape into a pen tool polygon. Another thing that I should explain about shape layers is that you can stack multiple shape layers on one After Effects layer, okay? So check this out. So if I just say have this circle here, and if I click off of this and don't have this layer selected and I draw another circle, I make 2 different shape layers. Here's my little circle and here's my big circle, right? But let me delete the little circle. If I have my big circle layer selected and I draw another circle on there, now you see that under shape layer 1, I've got ellipse 1 and ellipse 2 there. And theoretically, I could draw an infinite number of other shapes. They don't even need to be ellipses. They could be polygons, or they could even be something that I make with the pen tool. All right? So now you see on this one layer, I've got ellipse 1, which is my big circle, which I could actually even get in here and name by pressing return with the layer selected. And I could call this big circle, right? And then I could call this like little circle. And then here I've got my poly star, which is like my 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's a pentagon shape, right? So I could label as pentagon. Nope. Sorry, I don't know what I just pressed there. Get into my contents, and here is my polystar. So I could hit return and name that pentagon. Don't know what happened there. And then here you can see that I've got my shape, which is just called a shape, which is my polygon that I made with the pen tool, right? So just to reiterate again, in my polystar path, this is my pentagon now. I've got, different points, and I've got all these animation properties that I could change, but in shape 1, I've only got the path, right? Okay, so this is just to show that I can have multiple shapes on one shape layer. And all of these things can be changed now. So for example, I could take my pentagon and I could select that, and I could now individually make this a different color and leave the other things the same color, and I could do that for all of these things just by kind of clicking on them and changing the values. I could also get into the menus, obviously, like my fill menu here, and change the color that way too for anything that I want. So I still have individual control over all these shapes. And this is why, you basically have so many, different transform properties in here, okay? So for my ellipse 2, for example, like this right here, right? I can, we were kind of talking before, like, why am I getting a position and a scale just for this? Well, it's so that I can now scale this up independently or move this independently. So I could put a ton of different animation for all these different shapes within one layer. So in a way, a shape layer in and of itself can be almost like a pre-comp kind of within one layer where you can have multiple animations happening for multiple different shapes, all right? Sometimes that's confusing and sometimes it's not. Usually I would probably just have one shape per layer and animate that way, but not necessarily always, okay? So it's just very strong, and After Effects wants to give you the possibility to animate every single part of every single layer individually, okay? That's just what After Effects does. It wants to give you options, right? So this is definitely one. And another thing is that you can also put a mask on a shape layer. And I need to show you how to do this because it's a little bit tricky, right? So just say, theoretically, I have a shape layer. And let me go ahead and make this like a rectangle or something, right? And just say I want to have this draw itself on, right? Now there's multiple ways that I could do that, but just say that I want to do that with a mask. And I just want to mask this on, okay? I could definitely do this, but what might happen is if I select my layer and I choose, just say, this rectangle tool. Now, the rectangle tool and the pen tool, these both have multiple uses within After Effects, okay? If a layer is not selected at all and I choose my rectangle tool, I will make a shape layer, okay? But if a layer is selected, like just say if I make a new solid here, okay, and let me just hit okay. If I have a solid selected and I choose my rectangle tool and I click on this, now I'm making a mask of that solid, right? We've been over this before, and that mask could be animated, or I could actually have multiple masks on this one layer, and they could be add, they could be subtract, etc., right? So there's all these different properties of masks, including the animation of the mask and the feathering and so on. We've talked about this before, right? So if I have nothing selected and I use my rectangle tool, I make a shape. If I have a layer selected and I use my rectangle tool, I make a mask, unless the layer that I've selected is a shape tool. Because a shape layer rather. If I have a shape layer selected and I choose my rectangle tool and I click on this, I will make another shape layer, as we just went over, right? So the way to mask a shape layer is not totally obvious, but here's how you do it. There's this little additional buttons, these two buttons up here, okay? And with a shape layer selected, this is the only time this is going to be useful, and I have my rectangle tool or any of these or my pen tool selected, okay? I'm going to choose my ellipse tool just for the heck of it. Now, this button here says Tool Creates Shape, and that's what's defaulted. If I click on this, which says Tool Creates Mask, click on that, right? And now you see that little menu with the if I click on this, I've got this menu which shows me my fill color, my stroke, and everything. But if I click on this, that's no longer valid because I'm now making a mask, right? A circular mask on this shape layer. So now I can cut this up however I want using a mask, right? And the mask, of course, still has the normal properties that a mask would. It could be animated, it could be feathered, and it can move around, and so on and so forth, right? So that's how you mask a shape layer, which is something that's actually really confusing. It took me a bunch of times to work out before I noticed that kind of like small option button that I was just showing you. Cool. So that's that, all right? Now I do want to show that, okay, let's look at this. What happens if I use my pen tool and I don't have anything selected, right? And I'm making a shape layer, right? If I just do that, if I close up the path, I will make a shape layer, right? And that shape layer, as we went over before, has like a path that we can work with, right? But what happens, I'm going to delete that. What happens if I just don't close it up and I make something like that, right? Right now, because I have my fill selected, it's actually trying to fill this in, right? So what happens if I go up here to fill and click on that and then click on this to make this, not a fill, all right? So right now, what I have is a path with these 3 points, and I've got no fill and no stroke. So right now I've kind of built like an invisible layer, which is not that useful. But if I put a stroke on here, like if I twirled up this value, or if I selected stroke, or if I just even clicked on this, I think I would put I'd put a stroke value in there. Now it knows we want a solid stroke. It could also be, for example, a different color, or it could be even a gradient stroke, which could be a radial gradient or a linear gradient stroke. We'll talk about those gradients in one sec, like I said. But let me hit cancel on that. And if I just roll this value up, like I said earlier, now I can see that I've got a stroke there. So if you ever need to create an open path stroke, right, like this, or even fancier, you could do something that involves curves, like this, or whatever, something where you really like work the pen tool. You can do that as well. So you can make that kind of a shape, all right? And I just want to show that you can actually also mask this the same way if I choose, for example, my rectangle tool, or even if I choose my pen tool, right? And have this layer selected and choose this. Now I can mask also this stroke, right? So like I could theoretically do this, mask it completely off so there's nothing on screen, and now I could theoretically press M to reveal my mask, press my mask path, and then just say roll forward a couple of frames, and I could animate this to like stroke that on like this, right? So you can see, I think, what I'm getting at here, which is there are ways in After Effects to have strokes draw themselves on, okay? And this is something that people always want to know how to do for various reasons. This is a really useful kind of an animation, is to have a stroke write itself on, right? So what I'm showing here is that you can do this with a mask. But this is probably, using a mask is probably the very, very worst way to try to animate something writing itself on, okay? And the reason is that a mask works really well for writing on like a straight line, like this part of this, right? But once I start having to animate this going around a curve or another curve, masking soon becomes kind of not such a great way to reveal this line, okay? And if we actually look at this, I'll show you why. Okay, so I've animated it up to here, and now if I wanted to animate it to go around this turn here, right? For example, if I took my mask end and I kind of just moved it like that, what would happen is I'd create an animation where it works like this, and if I get in here, you can see that I'm not creating like a really good edge. I'm actually kind of revealing the gag of what I'm doing a little bit. It works really well for moving along this edge because the mask edge is parallel to the edge that you'd like the line to stroke on. But once we start going around the curve, it starts looking a little bit funky. So I could theoretically delete this keyframe, right, and just say move forward 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or something like that, something a bit random, and I could just take like one of these points and I could try to like work this like this so it looks a little bit better so that the edge is kind of turning on itself, right? But you see here, I do get to a point at which, and that looks better for the edge, right? But I get to a point at which I can no longer kind of do that because the mask starts cutting itself off, right? So what I would need to do is get in here and also choose my pen tool and then move over my mask and see how it has like a little plus there when it moves over it. That means it's adding a point to the mask. So I'd probably want to add a point here, maybe even here at that point, so that I can now drag this up and keep this moving in parallel with the edge, right? So now that looks okay. It looks better, right? So now theoretically, I have a straight line here that I could animate this on. So, but even still, like, I don't want to mess the rest of my mask up. So just say I move forward 10 frames. I guess I could take this and move that up, and take this and move that up, and hope that those move kind of in parallel, yeah? And that's not so bad, right? So right now it kind of moves over and turns and looks up. And then we could build another turn on this and another little straightaway, okay? And let me, you know what, just for the sake of it, because this is a really easy, good thing to demonstrate, let me do this real quick, all right? So let me move another couple frames up, and what I would need to do is, using my pen tool, make like a couple more points along here so that I have more points to animate around this curve, okay? So, and now I can take this and move this, just say like here or something, right? And move another couple of frames up and just get this so that it's now kind of on that straight edge there again, right? And so now I would need to animate this moving forward, but again, I need to put some more points in here, okay? So I would need to like hold this here and this here, probably be the easiest way. So if I move another 10 frames, I could kind of grab this and move that like that, and it would stay parallel. Okay, so let's check this out. Let's look at this animation and see what I've done. And again, the timings are pretty random, right? It doesn't look terrible, actually. This wasn't such a bad example, but what you can see here is that the variable speed of this animation is now a bit funky. It's like fast and slow, and then faster, and it's slow going around the curve and stuff. So now, if I want to make all this like just a little bit faster or make it all smooth and consistent, I have to get in here and sort of try to figure out, okay, well, this takes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 frames to go around the turn here, so maybe this should be slower or faster. So I would need to kind of take these points and drag them back and, do the kind of normal animation that I'd normally have done for you for this class, and just sort of determine things by the way it looks, right? And this is probably not the best way to go, because if I just want a consistent speed for this, or even better, if I want to just say, which I often do in real life, for this animation to start kind of slow and then for it to get faster as it goes and then kind of end slower or something like that, I've got a real problem here, because I have all these keyframes and it's very hard to determine the exact speed other than by just moving these keyframes closer to each other or farther apart to make them go faster or slower, okay? What I'd rather do is be able to adjust the speed on this in one go and just have one keyframe for the beginning and one keyframe for the end, so it makes it very easy to adjust, okay? So there actually is a way to do this and not using mask. I just wanted to show you how much of a pain in the neck this was first, okay? So I need to explain that there's this whole other menu that works with shape layers that gives you some additional animation advantages that are completely useful, okay? One of them is called trim paths, and this is probably the most useful of all of these, okay? So what I'm going to do is take this mask off. I'm going to delete this, okay? We all saw how annoying that was, but if I twirl down here, and I'm just going to call this my path, all right? Because this is just an open path. And if I twirl down here under my contents, I've got my shape 1, like we talked about earlier, right? And then what we didn't talk about is this right here. There's this little additional menu that says Add, and it's got this little circle with a triangle in it. And if you click on that, you will see that there are these additional menu items in here, okay? And the ones up top here, group, rectangle, ellipse, polystar, path, fill, stroke, gradient, etc. Okay, I don't think you should think about these that much. What you can do is you can make kind of a blank shape layer, and then you could put a rectangle on it, and then you could add a path or a fill to it, a stroke, a fill or a stroke rather, not a path, or a gradient fill. So rather than choosing the tool up here and then clicking and making those, you could build that bit by bit, starting with a blank shape layer. I don't necessarily see the big point in that for you guys, so I wouldn't worry about any of these, okay? But it's more these, all right? Merge paths, offset paths, pucker, bloat, repeater, round corners, trim paths. That's one of the really important ones that we're going to talk about now. And then twist and wiggle paths, wiggle, transform, and zigzag. A bunch of these, zigzag, wiggle paths, twist, round corners, and pucker and bloat, those all, and we'll go over those briefly, but those are all different ways to kind of warp a shape layer, okay? To kind of adjust the edges of it or to change the shape of it in some sense, right? But trim paths, the one that I want to talk about first, this is for stroking, for animating a strokes, really pretty much only, okay? So if I select this trim paths now, it adds a trim paths menu underneath my shape layer, okay? And if I open that up, we can see that I've got a start and an end and an offset, right? And right away, if we look at this and I just take my end value and I twirl this, right, you can see that I'm moving that value along the path that I drew, okay? So theoretically, I could just go to just say 0 in time, press the stopwatch to make an end keyframe at 0, move forward, just say 1, 2, just say 20 frames, okay? And then make this, move this, twirl this value so that it's at the end, right? And set my work area by pressing N. Now I can make this animation very easily, right? And you see, because I just have two, points, 2 keyframes for it, one for the start and one for the end, it's very easy for me to get in here and determine the speed and change it just with the clicking of one button, right? And After Effects does a really good job of keeping the speed consistent across the entire thing, across the entire animation, I should say, right? And you can even get in here and using your pen tool, now that even with this animated, you could still like add more points onto this and add more animation onto this and do, whatever you wanted. So you're not at all like locked into anything using this method. It's just a super awesome and useful way to draw lines on screen and have them animate. Okay, you can also additionally animate the start, right? So that theoretically you could have this start and end and kind of move off like this or something. Right? So the end is kind of chasing the tail. I mean, the beginning is chasing the end or whatever. And of course, the closer you put these two groups of keyframes together, the smaller of a segment that will be on screen at any one time. So you could have something like this, right? Of course, if you had the beginning and end all end at the same time, then you would see no animation because you're actually animating kind of none of it to animate all at the same time here, right? So trim paths is like super, super useful for many, many things. And I definitely suggest that that's something in this add menu that you get used to looking at. And we'll come back to trim paths in a sec because we're going to use that a bunch to talk about your homework. I just wanted to kind of bring this up and show you how this works. And, again, everything is still variable, which is really nice. If I made this a thicker stroke, the trim paths would still work. It would just be working on a thicker stroke. So it's really, really, really nice. And one other additional thing that I should say about strokes in general, I'm going to take this trim paths off for 1 sec, right? And now I just have this regular stroke, and I will dial this down. Is if you go into your contents under your shape layer and then go into your stroke menu, which we hadn't talked about before because we had that turned off, right? You can change the color, etc., and the width, and you can animate all this too. One really cool thing that you have here that you definitely don't have in any other way is you can animate and apply dashes to your strokes too, which is sometimes really useful. So if you press this button here, click, right? You can see now that I've got a dashed line, and you can make the dashes bigger or smaller. You can also add another plus here, and so now you've got a dash and a gap, so you could theoretically make like a really huge gap between the dash. If you change this from a line cap to a round cap, sort of like you have in Illustrator, you can make this round as well, and depending on the size of the gap and the size of the layer, you can actually kind of make these into like pills or little circular shapes. So this is just a really, really useful way to create this kind of a thing or any kind of dashed line system that you want, right? So you have a ton of options in here of what you can do. Shape layers are really, really powerful. Let me show you one other thing that you could do with shape layers, okay? So I'm gonna, and in that add menu, one other thing. Let me delete this path now, and I'll go ahead and make a circle, and let me make this solid, and turn this down. Actually, no, you know what? I take that back. I'm going to make this a stroked circle. So I think that'll show it easier. So I'm gonna make a stroked circle, right, with no fill on it. And then on the same layer, I want to make another stroked circle. Whoops. And I want to make it a circle. And I want to show that these two are they're both on the same layer, right? Okay. So if I go into my add menu now, I can find this thing called merge paths, which is sometimes really useful. So check this out. If I go to merge paths, okay, right away you can see what happened is that merge paths literally merged the two paths of my ellipses that I had drawn, okay? And let's dig into the merge paths menu a little bit more. So the mode here right now is add. But if I change this to subtract, it would subtract whichever shape is on top from the shape that's on bottom. So if I move ellipse 2 to ellipse 1, it makes it like that, right? So ellipse 2, remember, is the bigger one. We could even like name this. We could call this big, and we could call this lil, right? So whichever one's on top, that's the one that gets knocked out when it comes to merge paths and subtract, right? So you just have to change the order there. Theoretically, if we had another circle here, you know, we could have that also be the one on top or be the one in the middle, or, you know, you could cut multiple shapes out of one, right? I'm going to just delete that. And with merge paths, you can also have it intersect, which would give you the shape, you know, just where they touch. And theoretically, you could go to exclude intersections and get just that. I'm not quite sure why that's that way, but you have all these different options: add and subtract and intersect, right? So those are actually really useful if you want to make a complicated shape that, you know, you only know how to draw that using ellipses or whatever. You could certainly get in here and make like these interesting complicated shapes, and even still add to this by like drawing additional shapes on here. So you can make some really cool, interesting shapes, right? So merge paths is really useful as well. You might or might not ever need that. I just thought I'd bring that up for the heck of it, okay? Trim paths I find to be the most kind of useful thing in that add menu, but you should definitely check some of these out. I mean, so even with this kind of shape that we have here, let's just make this add, okay? If I have this shape here, and I wanted to, let's just say what I could do is I could add a twist onto here, right? And then that would give me the ability to kind of do stuff like this, and I could have it kind of change. This again, I find that this can make a kind of a mess right away, so I don't usually use that, but there's all these interesting kind of distortion things in here, like pucker and bloat, for example. You can kind of make crazy kooky shapes like this and animate them to go like that or whatever. So theoretically, you could do that and have some fun with that. So yeah, give it a try, dig through that add menu. I definitely think that trim paths is the only thing that we're really going to work with in this class, and specifically in this lecture, but it's hugely, hugely useful. All right, let me just go over gradient, strokes, and fills, because I promised I would, and I don't think it's that complicated. And I don't think, especially with gradient strokes, that's not something that comes up very often, but gradient fills are occasionally useful. So let me go over this. If I have a shape that I make with my shape tool, like a circle, right? And it defaults mostly to having a solid fill. But as I said earlier, if I click on the word fill, I can show these options. And one of them is this linear gradient and radial gradient. Radial gradient, it's hard to say. So let me click linear gradient, and I'll show you what this does. So right away you can see that it's sort of put this kind of default ugly gradient on there. I'm not sure why I chose those colors, but if we dig down here into our shape layer and into our contents and into the ellipse one, we'll see that now, instead of a fill, we have a gradient fill there, okay? And this menu is slightly different. It's got all this same stuff on top. Then it's got this start point and end point, which is sort of how you can animate where the gradient kind of stops and starts, right? And then there are this colors property, which this is a little bit awkward, I'm going to say, in terms of design for After Effects, because in order to change the colors, you have to click this button, Edit Gradient, which then launches another window. And so up in here, for example, you would select like this color, and then you can change this to be kind of whatever you want. And then when you're done with that, you can kind of select the other color of the gradient and kind of put that wherever you want that. And additionally, you can kind of decide like the percentage or the location of the gradient itself to some degree or other. I almost never use this button, but let me show you. Once you click OK, right? Now, if I choose my normal V arrow, right, and I select not my layer up here, but if I select into my ellipse, either on the ellipse or in the gradient fill, I can see that I now have these two little handles, and these are my gradient fill start and end points, right? This is the end point I'm moving around, and this is the start point. And these can be animated, which is super cool. You know, you just need to click the stopwatch here. And the colors can sort of be animated too, though not with as much direct control as I'd like. But that's basically how you do this. If you want to if you want to animate the colors, you'd have to make a stopwatch keyframe for the colors at whatever point you want, and then move in time, either forward or back, whatever you want. And then you'd have to click back on here into Edit Gradient, and then click on this, change the color of this a little bit, or wherever you wanted it to go, and then click on this, and then somehow change the color of that wherever you wanted that to go. And so now you can make an animation between those two gradients, but I find it's a little bit of a locked box, and it's a little bit hard to control. I personally wish that I had a little picker and eyedropper for both of the colors, and I could set them each individually and directly that way, but whatever. After Effects doesn't need to listen to me about this. So that's gradient fill, and that's pretty much it. You can also switch the type from linear to radial right here. You remember you have that option up when you click on the word fill. So if I click on radial gradient, you'll see that now I have a kind of a gradient that's based on a circle, right? So I can kind of, make it fade to a darker color here, which gives the circle, in this case, the illusion of kind of being rounded, right? So occasionally that's interesting or useful. I'm going to delete that shape now and show you gradient stroke real quick. So if I choose my pen tool and I turn off my fill, right? And let me just boost this up to something big, and I'll show you this here. Okay, so right now we just have the normal stroke like I showed you earlier. But if I click on this word stroke, I can also give this a linear gradient rather, and hit OK, and you can see it's starting to work already. And it's basically the exact same thing as the gradient fill. If I go into my contents, instead of fill, now I have gradient stroke here, right? And now same exact things. I can basically just change the colors right here in the gradient, or the start point, end point. And again, when I click on this with my V arrow, it gives me these little controls here. So you could theoretically edit this color so that the start color is the same, for example, as your background color, and then it can kind of be like fading. Looks like it's sort of fading in or whatever. So I guess that's sort of useful, and you can exaggerate that if you want. So that's sort of really fading in, yeah, so that's pretty much it with the gradients. Go ahead and play around with those. I find them, to be marginally useful, not necessarily awesomely useful. Before we go on to talking about how to do your homework, I need to explain one other thing to you first, and that is the idea of alpha mats in After Effects, okay? If you've ever framed a photo, you kind of have a sense of what a mat is like, all right? I happen to have something right here, which is an award that I just recently won for being a distinguished teacher, okay? So here, you've got a typical photo with a mat situation, okay? It's not a photo, but it's an award plus a mat, right? So the mat is this gray piece of cardboard that goes around the outside that contains the award kind of within it. There's a hole here, right? Obviously, and wherever there is mat, because the mat is, not a transparent thing, wherever the mat is, you can't see through it, right? Now there happens to be a hole in this, and so you can see what's underneath, which is, again, the award. But this is kind of similar to the idea of a track mat or an alpha mat in After Effects, okay? Let me put this down for a sec. So an alpha mat in After Effects essentially deals with transparency, okay? So if you have an object on screen and it's fully opaque, meaning that it's not transparent, its pixels are fully opaque, there's no other word for it, okay? You can't see through it at all. Then what you could tell After Effects is to take the alpha information of that layer, wherever it is not transparent. And we can use that information, for example, to fill in another layer into that spot. All right? So theoretically, maybe that doesn't make that much sense, but let me take you through this in After Effects real quick. So let me choose a rectangle, and let me fill it in with a color here. Okay, it really doesn't matter. And let me kind of just draw it on screen. All right, so here is my square. I just made it a square, and it's pink. And this pink square now is a fully opaque square. Okay, so it's ready to be used as an alpha mat. The alpha information is all right here contained within itself. All right, so if I have a layer like this, like I scanned something and I brought it in, and let me make this a little bit smaller. So this is this old ad that I scanned in for Rockford socks or whatever. I just like these kind of weird graphics on here, okay? So theoretically, I could kind of do the opposite of what my Distinguished Teaching Award was, where I could use this circle instead of being kind of square. I called it a circle. Sorry, I could use that square as either to reveal the information of what's below it, which is this scan that I did, or I could do it the opposite, where wherever the square is, there's nothing there, and what's filled in is around it, okay? Either way, I could do both of those things, and I would be using the alpha information of this square layer, okay? So to make this a little bit easier, I'm going to call the square a mat, okay? That's technically what it's called. And this, what I've scanned, let me just rename this as a fill, okay? Because what you're always doing is you're always placing these objects in very specific orders in After Effects, in a very specific order, I should say. The mat always goes on top, and what's being filled into the mat always goes underneath it, okay? And just make sure that you have this button here expanded so that you can see these three options here, this mode and then this T and then this thing called TRK-MAT, which stands for track mat. And that's what we're going to actually use here. All right? So what we want to do is take the fill, the thing that's on the bottom, that which is being filled in, okay, and go over to here under track mat and pull down this tab till you see it says alpha mat mat, okay? And this is just the name of the layer that I gave it, okay? So if I click that, now you'll see a few things have happened. For one, the mat layer on top has turned itself off. The eyeball is now off, and it should remain so. Secondly, the fill eyeball has now gone to be white where it was black, so it looks a little bit different. And this is meant to indicate that the change has happened and that this pairing is now set. And the other thing is that he's got these two little extra icons right here, which now this implies that this is a matte and fill pair, okay? This is the matte. It's sort of trying to represent it. Like where it's black, is where it would be invisible, and where it's the white circle, that's where it's being filled in. And it's kind of the opposite here. These icons aren't so great. But nonetheless, on screen, you can see what happened. And I'll turn on my pink square for 1 sec and turn it off and on. And you can see that wherever the square is, this is now filled in. And I could actually move this layer around underneath, right? And it still will hang out in that same spot. And theoretically, I could take my square, which is now turned off, but I can also move this, and wherever that is now, that's where the matte is, okay? So the matte and the fill actually can both be animated underneath. So this is one advantage that matte-fill pairs give you. These two things always have to be left in this exact order with the matte on top and the fill underneath. And if I had just say like, if I made a new solid or something, Command Y, okay? And I put that between them, then right now, this fill, I'd have to turn this off, but this fill is now using the solid as the matte, right? And so if I move the matte, which is on top now, it's now, moving what's being revealed there. But basically, if you move something in between a matte and fill layer, it tends to use it as the new matte layer. So you definitely want to make sure that, you always keep your matte and fill combos together. And you always want this, by the way, to be off, okay? And for it to look like this. Also, I just want to point out that under track matte here, you could also have a inverted alpha matte, okay? And in this case, that would look like this. And it would kind of be a little bit more like my Distinguished Teaching Award in a way. It kind of makes like a frame around it, the box. It's sort of wherever this was, wherever the alpha information was on that, what it's saying is like just show the opposite. Use the opposite of that as the matte. Okay, so if this was full screen like this, it would be full screen, but it would have a hole in it. That would be essentially a transparent hole if there was no background on it. Okay, so alpha inverted is the opposite of an alpha matte. Okay, and then there are these luma mattes and luma inverted, and that uses luminance, which is black and white levels. We're not going to get into that at all in this class, but that's actually also a very useful thing that'll become familiar to you as you get further into your After Effects career. Okay, so now we need to take this one step further. And theoretically, if I have a composition and I'm working with an element that I could not have made in After Effects, like this, okay? Right here, I've got a tapered stroke that I made in Illustrator. Now, if I wanted this to draw itself on, right, how would I do that? Well, obviously, if it wasn't tapered, if it was just a curved stroke in After Effects, something that I made with the pen tool, I could use trim paths to animate that, as I showed earlier. I could just assign a value to the end and just sort of bring my stroke on and off. It's really very easy, right? We went over that already. So if I want to animate something that sort of acts like a trim path animation, but with artwork that I couldn't make in After Effects, I need to actually use a combination of alpha matte and trim paths. And if that didn't make sense to you, no problem. I'm going to go over this right now, okay? So first, let me make my matte. So what I actually need is a stroked path that covers this completely, that's basically in the same shape as it, all right? And if it doesn't make sense, just follow with me here. So I'm going to take my pen tool and making sure that this is not selected, so I'm not making a mask on it, but instead I'm going to make an all new shape layer. And what I want to do is actually click on fill and make this a non-fill, right? And now this is a nice red color, which I like, but I'm going to just turn this up, I don't know, to 40 or something big enough that I can see it. And now quickly what I'm going to do is just recreate this stroke as best as possible here with my pen tool in After Effects. Okay, so I'm going to start kind of down here, and I'm just going to really try to make this as close as I can to the original shape. And it's going to take me a sec to do. I'm not so good with the pen tool here. Maybe like that. And okay, let me go over here and do this. And now let me just adjust this a little bit so this works a little bit better. And just trying to get this good. So what you really want to do is make this so that it's kind of evenly distributed through the center of your artwork, okay? And that's good enough. So now what I'm going to do is take this and I'm going to get in a little closer and see where this is very wide here. I need this, which is going to be my matte, to widen out so that it covers that, okay? So like that, something like that. So now you see I've got a red stroke that completely covers my black tapered stroke, right? And what I'm going to do is get in here and call this my matte, just for your sake, okay? and my tapered stroke is, I'm going to call my fill. Because I just always want you to get used to this idea that the matte layer always has to go on top of the fill layer, okay? The matte on top, and then whatever's getting filled into that goes underneath it, all right? Sometimes it takes people a little while to get used to this, and it did for me too, so it's not you, okay? So now what do we need to do? If we assign the track matte information to this now, the alpha matte, I should say, if we pull down this tab and make this an alpha matte now, I can see my fill again through my matte, right? And it's turned this off and it's given us these funny little icons here, right? So now it's all set up, but I still need to add the trim paths to this. And this is what's going to make this really special. So the trim paths I'm going to add to my stroke layer that I just made here in After Effects, because you can't add trim paths to anything other than a stroke layer, right? Or a shape layer that you create in After Effects. It's an After Effects exclusive thing, right? That's why we need to do this. So I'm going to turn this back on for a sec just to show you. I'm going to go down, twirl down this and go to my Add menu, and I'm going to click that and go to Trim Paths. We did this earlier, so I'm hoping this makes sense. Whereas now you can see here, I've got this, which I can use. I can adjust the end value to have it sort of write itself on. So I'm going to move a few frames forward, and I'm going to click end at 0%, and I'm going to move like 30 frames down, and I'll make this 100%, right? So obviously now this just looks like this. No big deal, right? We went over this earlier, and this is awesome, right? But here's the big deal, okay? If I now turn this off, right? Because now I've still got my track matte, my alpha matte going on here. The fill is filling into the matte, and the matte is now animated, so it looks like this tapered stroke is just writing itself on, okay? But what it really is just a moving matte that's revealing static artwork underneath, right? But we're fooling the eye into thinking that it's drawing itself on. But it's actually two layers, one of which is a matte. Okay? And I hope that makes sense to you guys, because we're going to be doing this a bunch in our homework. I realize that was quite a lot to take in, so thank you for sticking with me through all of that difficulty. I hope all that made sense. For your homework, what I'm asking you to do is write a script word on screen so that it looks like it's being written on screen, right? Piece by piece. And this is actually something that's really fun to do, and it's something that clients ask for a lot. And it's also something that students always ask me about. How do I do that, you know? Okay, so I wanted to explain it to you. It did involve explaining a lot of other things first, and I actually still need to take you through some of the real tricks of this, okay? Because this is not the easiest thing in the world to do. And the reason it's not the easiest thing in the world to do is because of various overlap points in script, okay? And this is going to happen no matter what script font you use, okay? So I happen to use this one, which is called Lavendaria, which is one of those pay-your-own-price scripts from the Lost Type Co-op. I definitely suggest you check it out. It's a great font. But, okay, if this was going to be writing itself on screen, just say starting with the S, we wouldn't be seeing the W-E-E-T and the exclamation point, right? In fact, all we'd be seeing at the very start is this stroke, okay? This stroke would write itself on first, okay? And none of this would be here, okay? And when this gets somewhere around here, then we'd start to see this next stroke, right? I mean, or we'd start to see, you know, as it got up here that this was coming down, then we'd start to see the end of the stroke when it got to the end, right? So that sounds good in theory, but what happens in practice is if we animate this on this way, and we're not seeing this yet, it's very likely that we'll accidentally reveal pieces of the rest of this artwork here on these overlap periods or spots right here, for example, and right here. And especially right here, as it crosses through itself, we'd only want it to show just a little thin strip of this that's just as wide as this stroke. And if it reveals any of this thickness up and down here or here or here, it'll kind of ruin the gag and you'll kind of see the art. And you'll see it before you should be seeing it. So that's why it kind of ruins it, right? And that same goes for in this sort of overlap part here and in this part right here and where the E crosses itself and where this enters the E and all these points, okay? So all this needs to be dealt with. Now, there's essentially two ways that I can think of right off the top of the bat to handle this. And both of them are difficult and time consuming. Or they're not really difficult, let's just say they're both time consuming, okay? And one of them you would do if you know Illustrator really well, and I've done that, which is to break these pieces down into non-overlapping strokes, okay? And the other way to do it is in After Effects, where we're just gonna try to animate it using the method I was just showing to animate the tapered stroke. And wherever things overlap, what we're gonna do is we're gonna get really crafty with some masks, and we're gonna get in there and mask off the overlap points as they happen, okay? So this is actually a really, really good thing to try to practice to do in After Effects because it is difficult and because it's going to involve trim path and alpha mats and masks, okay? So this is a really good exercise, I believe, right? So I'm going to do it the way, for the most part, that the all internal After Effects method because I don't know if you guys know Illustrator well enough to really break this down, and it doesn't really matter because it would take the same amount of time anyway, but I did want to show how I did this just in case. Okay, so for like the letter S, for example, I broke that down to show you into these two different strokes, all right? One that, looks like this, and this would be the first one. It would go like this, and it would draw itself like that, and you can see it's slightly funky where that overlap is, but I'm hoping that people don't notice that, and that goes fairly quickly and draws itself like that, okay? And then I've got this piece, which looks continuous, but which is actually a separate layer and which could complete the S stroke, okay? So that's one way to do it, is to break it down in Illustrator. And like I said, we're going to do it the other way, but I'm going to show you how to do both in After Effects, right? So I just wanted to show you that my S1 and S2 layers are like that, and then I've got one full layer called Sweet. And just as a note, I did break these down. In case you don't know Illustrator at all, if you have live type and you want to break it down into outlines or vector shapes, that's kind of the best way to bring it into After Effects for this kind of work. So in case you don't know how to do that, you just would go up to type and create outlines. Okay, in this case it's already been created, but that's a good thing to do if you're going to do this method. Okay, so I'm going to open up now in After Effects. And now you can see I've got this here and I've got my layers as they were. So if I just look at my two S layers really quickly, I think you can see based on my previous example how this will not be too difficult to animate once it's been broken down this way. So for example, if I start with S2, actually I should start with S1. No, S2, sorry, I just named it wrong. I think this is the first one that would write itself on. So let me start with this. Okay, so as before, I just need to make sure this is not selected, and I need to go through here and kind of quickly, oops, that's way too thick now. And let me actually delete that now. Okay, and just start getting in here and trying to make a pretty good smooth curve to cover over this stroked S, or this part of the S here, right? Okay. And I apologize in advance for this being slightly boring to watch me do this, but who knows, maybe this is your thing. Cool. And I might need to make this a little bit thicker, and yeah, I'm going to get this to end somewhere right up to where it ends there. And it does look like I need to make this a little bit thicker, just because I'm seeing some of the black, I feel like, in there. So let me just make this a little bit thicker. Okay, and that should do it. So awesome, I've made my S2, what I'm going to call my S2 matte, okay? And now I can go ahead and click on S2, and with the matte above it, I can make this an alpha matte, right? So now that shows that again. And now I can click on S2 matte and twirl this down and show my add menu and add a trim paths, okay? And so now you can see that I'm controlling that, right? So let me dial this down to 0. I'm going to move just a few frames to like frame 6 or something. Press the stopwatch to make an end keyframe at 0. And I will move, I don't know, 20 frames down by hitting shift and page down. And now I'll dial this up to 100, okay? So that seems to be good. And we can watch that down, right? Not so bad. What we need to do now is do the same thing for this layer. And I'm actually going to solo this for a second just so I don't need to see the other one. and deselect that. Grab my pen tool again, which is already selected, and just make sure that I'm kind of making a nice arc here that matches this. That's looking a little bit funky. Pretty good there. Just get the curve right. You can always kind of move this around. It looks pretty good, right? So now I will call this. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to put this on top of S1, right? Because matte and fills always have to go together, and matte always has to be on top and fill has to be right beneath, right? And then I'm going to call this S1 matte, right? And then I could take this and make this an alpha matte, the S1 layer, so that fills in there. And theoretically, and then the next step is I should take this and, not theoretically, but actually add a trim path to this with that add menu and do the same thing where I dial this back down to 0, make a keyframe, move forward, I don't know, like 15 frames in this case. It's a little bit smaller, and now dial that up to 100. And now let me press U to show the animation of both, okay? And I will unsolo this so I can see it. So first thing that happens is this starts to draw itself on, and then this second part of it needs to draw itself on starting, ooh, you know what? Looks like I've made a mistake here. I really did this backwards, which is I should have it start there and go that way, which is actually kind of interesting because I don't really need to redo the path or anything. Instead of using end, I just need to use start. So that was actually kind of a good teacher error moment. So I didn't do it on purpose, but it's a good teaching moment. So I'm going to set this back to 100, and I'm going to go back here, and what I'm going to do is actually dial the start to 100 because I want this to move this way, right? So I just need to animate the start and not the end. So I will make a keyframe here, and then move 10 frames, I think is what I did, or 15, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and dial the start down to 0 in this case. Okay, so now we can watch those two together. Right, and let me add a little more time on the end so it's a little easier to see. Yeah, and it feels pretty fluid, right? It feels like it slows down a little bit at the end, and maybe that's nice, or maybe we want to extend this out, or maybe we want to make this go faster, actually. Right? So it's a little bit of a cheat because you kind of have to stitch those two things together, and you have to make sure that it's kind of happening at the right speed for when they link up or whatever, okay? So, you know, that's one method. This is the method that involves breaking things down in Illustrator, and you kind of have to be pretty good at Illustrator, I think, to break things down that way. So you don't have a lot of obvious gaps, and so it just doesn't take you a really long time. If you're not much of an Illustrator person, I would definitely recommend doing it the way that I'm going to do it next, which is just to do it all in After Effects. First things first, when I look at the word, it's definitely, I can see that it is easily broken down into 3 sections. One is the S, which doesn't touch any of the other pieces, and then there's the W, E, E, and T, all of which touch each other, and then there's the exclamation point, which also is on its own. So in my mind, I'm definitely thinking about this as like 3 different pieces, or maybe 2. But I would definitely start by doing the S first, because it's sort of complicated, and it's its own standalone shape. So what I would do is take my sweet layer, which is all of this, and duplicate that, Command D, all right? And I'm going to turn one off, and I'm just going to call this one the S, okay? So now I know I can just deal with this and not worry about the rest of that. And now I need to basically do the same thing that I did before, which is make a stroke that goes over and covers all the pieces of this and is in one nice, clean, curved stroke, okay? So I got to do that first and with nothing selected so I can make this a shape layer. So I would get in here, and this is pretty much the same as what I did earlier, and just kind of make these points as best as I can and just make it smooth and cover everything up. And you can already probably start to see here the sort of overlap action that I'm talking about. Let's see, maybe like, oh, this was fine here. Sorry, talking to myself while I do this. Slightly confusing. Sure. And let me just get this right. Okay. and try to make it smooth, but basically the main thing is that it just has to cover over itself and doesn't worry. You don't have to worry so much about this being like a little bit of a kink right there, okay? And let's just make sure that this needs to be this thick, which it looks like it does. Maybe if I put this here, I can kind of make it a little bit thinner. So you only want this to be as thin or thick as it needs to be. Okay, that looks pretty good to me. And let me go ahead and call this my S matte. And let me put a trim paths on it. Okay. And let's look at this again. All right. So now, I think when I did this in the earlier example, I got this backwards, right? So actually, I think if I was writing this, I would start here. And for some reason in the last example, I had it start there, which messed me up, but don't worry about it so much. It doesn't really matter. But let's have this one start here and end here, okay? So that would be like this. That would be the start animating from 0 to 100, okay? And depending on how you stroked it on, yours might be different, depending on how you drew this, okay? But it's all the same. You're always animating either start or end, from either 0 to 100 or from 100 to 0, okay? So, okay, let me go to like around the beginning, maybe frame 5 or 7, whatever, and I'll make a start keyframe there, and I'll go like 1, 2, 3, shift 3 shift page downs to move a whole second or 30 frames, and I will dial this so that it gets to the end there, okay? And then let me take my S and go to here and make this an alpha matte, right? So now it looks like this. And you can already see the issue that I was talking about. That is why we started this in the first place, this discussion, which are these horrible overlaps. And we know we can't make the matte rather, any thinner because it needs to cover up some of these thick parts, right? And we can't we could animate the stroke, the thickness of the matte of the stroke going on here, but eventually we'd need to widen it out before these parts got covered up, so we would then see them at that point anyway. So theoretically, there's no other way around this, right? So if we're happy with the animation speed, what we can do now is get down to work cutting these out using masks, okay, which is slightly tedious, but it's sort of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other of whether you're doing it this way or you're doing it the other way by starting in Illustrator and taking all that time to cut all those points off and make them into individual layers, all right? So, your choice as to what you want to do, but I think the easiest way to go is you start here, and here is the very first frame where we see this overlap, right? So we need to get rid of this right here. And, the best way to do this is to select our S layer, not the matte, by the way, but the S, okay? And now use the pen tool, but not to create a stroke, but to make a mask on this art layer, right? And cut this off. So what I would do is get in here and kind of go on either side of these and kind of start cutting that off. Okay, now what I need to do is press M and make this a subtraction mask. Okay, and by the way, pressing M just showed my mask properties. I think we talked about this before. And then right next to that in mask is this menu, which you can make an add mask or a subtract mask. And so in this case, we want to subtract. Whatever's inside the mask, we want to subtract from the screen, okay? And I also want to go down here and make a new mask and do the same thing there, which is to kind of cut that out and make that a subtraction mask, okay? So the trick here is to make it look pretty smooth, which isn't necessarily that easy, okay? But you just want to get in there and just make sure that this curve here is fairly smooth and you can't tell that that's happening, okay? And looks pretty good. Like when you zoom all the way back, then you can kind of see it, all right? So now this writes on, but we do not see that overlap point, okay? And when we need to see that overlap point is starting around here, right? Now you can see that the masks are revealing that it's cut out, all right, which is not good. Remember, this is all about creating an illusion. If we do this right, the audience is never aware of any of these pieces and they have no idea. It just looks like this really seamless thing, right? So, okay, so we got those masks, and for now, we do not need them to animate at all, okay? But what we might want to do in prep is make a mask position keyframe for both of those, a mask path keyframe rather, okay? Set those for those. And now we're going to make those hold keyframes, which I did talk about once as sort of a bonus. But remember, what it means is that there'll be no animation between this mask keyframe and the next one. In fact, the value will just hold there until it reaches the next keyframe. And that's going to be really important in this case, okay? So the way that I do that is I made regular keyframes just by selecting them and clicking on the stopwatch. And now I'll select both those points and both of those keyframes rather. And I will right-click on that and go to Toggle Hold Keyframe. Okay, and it'll make it that squared off looking keyframe. I could have also just hit Option and Command and clicked on these, which will toggle them back and forth between being regular linear keyframes and hold keyframes like that. Okay, so those are all fine, and what we want to do is now figure out when it gets here. Okay, I think that is the first frame that we want this pink mask to go away. So remember, this is a subtraction mask, so as long as I take this and move this someplace where there is no art for that layer, it will be literally subtracting nothing, so it won't really make a difference, right? So then, as you can see here, this gets to this frame, and the mask is right there, and then I get to the next frame, and because this is a hold keyframe, it just moves over all in one go right over there, and then this stroke looks like it just happens to go up and just fill in on itself there, right? Okay, so this is basically the method that we're going to do. We're going to make these masks, and then we're going to use hold keyframes to move them on and off, all right? So let's check now. If we move this mask, the orangey mask, off at this frame, it looks like that is also the art had already moved onto there at that point, so this is a good place just to move this off. And if you're worried about these masks, by the way, you could always take them and just sort of move them off, literally off the entire, make sure to grab all the points, by the way, and off the screen entirely over here, for example, so that they just like live there, and then when they're not needed, they're there. So let's watch this down, and you can see kind of like what just happened. Right? It's not much to look at because you're kind of looking at the absence of something in some sense, but there's no overlap there. And then it's perfectly seamless again when it gets back down to there, right? This is just a trick of the eye, and I hope that makes sense. But let's go over this more, and surely it will make sense as we go further along, okay? So back at the beginning, right here, we have this other problem, which is this overlap point. So we need to get in there and make masks again just like these. So I'm going to zoom in, and with my layer selected, so I can make a mask, I'll choose my pen tool. Again, if the layer wasn't selected, I'd be making a shape. So I have to select this, right? And just kind of get in here and make sure I'm masking this off just right. Okay, and I'll widen that out a little bit like that. And I'm going to make this a subtraction mask. Okay, that looks pretty smooth. Something there that's bothering me. See, like that, okay. And now I'll make another mask for here. Right, and also make that subtraction. If you lose your masks, by the way, you just have to press M and you'll show all your masks, right? So there you go. So now we got this. And then this is needed only right here at the very end. So I think this would be the first frame for this one, for the yellow one, it looks like. The last frame is that the last frame it's necessary, it looks like it's here, but let's see. So I'll make a mask path keyframe, and I'm going to Option Command click on this to make this hold. And I'll just back this up somewhere. It doesn't really matter where that starts, okay? And then what matters is where it ends. And I think this is the last frame, so I will choose my V arrow. And let me move this off over here for a sec and go one more frame. Nope. Let's see. If I move this back up there. Yeah, okay. we need it actually to extend one more frame. So that's where that happens, okay? And so I hope that made sense, that this is the very last frame before this. So the mask is still needed here, but then when it gets here, I move the mask over here, or I could actually take it and move it over here to hang out and have a party with its friends over there, okay? And then theoretically, let me check this other mask. Let me make a mask path, because I never did that, and Option Command click on this, or right click on it and toggle hold keyframe. Okay, make that a hold keyframe. Let's just move this back now somewhere. It doesn't really matter where. And now let's test this. Let's see what frame we really need this to be gone at. So, oh, okay. So here it looks like it's already working, right? So let's, yep. So I just moved that here just because I wanted to see whether that was good. But now let me actually go onto that keyframe, which is this one, and take this and put this over here with its friends. They're having a little party over there in Siberia. Okay, so let's check this out. So the illusion is now working on 2 of the overlap points pretty well, I think. Right? Okay, good. So now all we would need to do is now get in here and do the same thing for these overlap points. And you can see this, it's not really that tricky or difficult to do. It's just one of those things that takes a sec. Okay? So we'll get in here and again, take this, and I'm going to choose my pen tool, which, by the way, the shortcut in After Effects for the pen tool is G. As in G. I wonder why they used G as the shortcut. But I know that they couldn't use P for the pen tool because P is the position property shortcut, right? So G. So G, I wonder why they did that. G, your hair smells terrific. Okay, so I'm going to get in here and do this 2 more times. Just make some nice curves for that and cut this out and show this, see what it looks like. Pretty good. I think I could do a better job there. I'm kind of aware of the edge there. So take this, move it down just a little. Yeah, that looks better. Whatever. Looks pretty good. And now let me make one final mask here for this. And I get in here and make a point. Oh, I didn't click on the layer, so I'm making a shape layer. Teacher error. Click on the S before you do this. Okay. And now get in there. And let us make this subtract. Yeah, that looks really good. Okay, cool. So I will make mask keyframes for mask 5 and mask 6. These are these ones here. And then I'll press U to reveal my animated properties. Okay. And I will Option Command click on these 2 points to make them hold keyframes. Again, I could have just toggled them, but that's the shortcut. All right, so it's here, and then right here, we can see that the stroke has started to dip down behind my mask. So now this looks like it's going to involve a little bit of animating the mask because it's not just an on-off thing, okay? So what I need to do is here, my mask needs to move a little bit, all right? So I could just select these points and pull this down a little bit here, so it's masking it right there because that's the edge. Down below here, this is still my overlap going on, right? I don't want that, so I pulled that down there, right? So now I've made like a little animation, actually, a hold keyframe animation. And then I can go probably just one more frame down and now get rid of all this altogether. Yep, okay, so I can take that mask off and drop that over in what will ultimately be Siberia over there. The other masks have not yet jumped over there because they happen down here. This is actually the first one to move off. I've just done it in backwards order. Okay, and now let's check to see if mask 6 is needed here. And it looks like it is not. It is also... No, you know what? I take that back. I think the mask is still necessary here. I think we need to move this one frame down that way. Yeah, like that. And the reason that I think that is because if I undo that, this is being cut kind of like it was at the beginning before I had a mask on it. I can't show you that without getting rid of the mask, but you can kind of tell it's not part of the leading edge of the stroke because otherwise it would be parallel with itself. And when it gets here, it's angled. It should be straighter. So I can see this is just still the cutout part of the overlap part of the mask from earlier, right? So I took this, I pushed this hold keyframe back one frame so that it could stay here, this frame, and then move off on the next frame, right? Hope that made sense. And now I'll take this and just put this over here too with its friend. So they're having a little party, okay? So now, that's it. Now those masks jump over there to Siberia when they're no longer needed on screen here, and same with these, right? So let's watch this down. Right, and so it seems fairly smooth and elegant now, right? And you don't really think about all the little steps that went into it. The only tricky thing about this is if I say to myself, gosh, now that I've animated this whole thing, I'm not sure I love the timings on this. Like, I kind of wish this was slower or faster or whatever, right? Since it's based on these two timings, but that's only for the stroke, okay? If I change these timings here, I'm going to need to adjust the points at which these hold keyframes leap over there to make the mask leap over there, right? Okay, so just so you know, I'll do that now. Let's say I want this to go slower, okay? A little bit slower, like another 10 frames, whatever. My client told me it had to be 10 frames slower, okay? Blame it on the clients. So now all this is going to happen wrong, right? You can kind of see the points pop on and off in the wrong place. So I just have to go through here and figure out again exactly where these points need to be gone, right? So this here is my first one, and that's this orange mask. And I seem to remember that this was like that, yep, and that happened there. Okay, so I just need to shove these timings back. Now I don't need to take the original timings of these hold keyframes and move those back. Those could actually live all up at the start because those are kind of the proto positions of those masks before they ever need to move, right? And with hold keyframes, it just holds this value until it gets to the next keyframe, so it doesn't matter where these original ones are. Okay, all we need to do is now change the timings for when these happen. Okay, so I think it was one frame later, I needed this to move off, right? And it looks like that's got a funky end on it, so let me go ahead and that made that a little funky. If I do that, it's got a strange edge to it. It's like partially, this is the leading edge here, and this is the old edge from the original mat, believe it or not. So what I need to do is make one more keyframe. I'm going to copy this original keyframe and put it there, okay? And now what I'll do is try to figure out where this needs to go. Okay, I see. So I just need to fake this so I cut out this part, right? So I take this and put this up in the corner there, and that, and I'm just going to kind of pull that in so it's kind of straight. In fact, what I'm going to do is go to my up here and convert vertex tool and just make this non-Bezier, this point right here, okay? And just select my regular tool and just make sure that this is a straight line here, okay? Like that, and now like that, okay? That's what I needed to do to fix this because I changed the timing. And I just wanted the leading edge to look normal, okay? So let me change these other timings now. So now this is the last frame. So for this mask, so that's, I believe, let's see, it's this one, I think. Yep. So I need that to go like that. Yep, so it holds until it hits there. Excellent. So this is the first frame where that's gone. And then this one needs to be like there. Yep. Okay. And now I just need to put these back. So this was this, right? So let me see now. I need to click this. Okay, so this frame is when it goes away, I believe. So this is the away mask. Yep. Okay, and so now this, I see what it is. It's just this mask. So if that's there, okay. Now it looks also like this tiniest little bit needs to be masked there because cut that mask there. So let me, actually what I'll do is I'll copy and paste, paste that there. Sorry, copy and paste that there. Okay, so this is like that, and then this was like that. So I just need to, oh, I see. Never mind. I just need to make this mask one frame later move off, I think. I think that's right. Let's check this down. Yeah. Cool. So sometimes when you change the timings, it can add a little bit of funky results there. So that's a good thing to know, is probably get the stroke timings best at first if you can. So I got my S and my S mat here, and what I'm going to do is just lock those so that I know that I don't mess any of that up. And now I've got the word sweet here, which let me go ahead and duplicate this, Command D, okay, and turn the original off, and I'll call this one wheat. Okay, and all I need to do here is basically repeat the same process that I've just worked on. I need to take my pen tool, and I need to trace this line here, which is going to be a little tricky, and I might do this in fast motion so you don't have to watch me struggle through all this. But remember, unlike the way I did originally, you always want to think about the way you want this to write on. So in this case, it's fairly clear. I'm starting here, and I'm ending here, okay, and moving in that direction, all right? So I'm going to draw this all on. Okay, so I did all that. Now the interesting thing is I have this crossbar for the T here. You can't really see a bunch of it's being covered up by my fat stroke. But I was just wondering, do I want this, I think I want this to go this way, like to stroke across that way. So what I was going to do is kind of cheat this a little bit and just continue this line up here, avoiding the exclamation point. And I was going to kind of just draw this down here and put like a little loop in this so that I know that that can come around at the end and cover up the T real quick, because it'll build like a little bit of a pause, like the hand got picked up while the artwork has to sort of stroke around there. So we'll see if that works, but I think that's pretty good. And I can check to make sure that now I think I can make this a little bit thinner. Yeah, just like that, I guess, a little tiny bit thinner. Okay, so that's good, and that's all pretty worked out, right? So let's not worry about that too much. What I'm going to do is call this the wheat mat, okay? And let me drop this above my wheat layer, because the mat always has to be on top of the fill, always, 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 right? And now I can take this fill and I can make a track mat an alpha mat, right? So now it's filled in there again, so we can't see that big pink thing. But I can take this layer and go down here to the contents, to my add menu, and make a trim paths. And now I can, I believe that is the end now that I want to animate, yes. Okay, great. And you can see how funky this looks and how much work we're going to need to do to get this just right, okay? I'm going to start with my end here, and let me figure out where my S ended, somewhere there. Okay, and now I'm going to make an end keyframe. And again, the timings are really important to get this right as best as possible. This is a bunch of words, so let's make this 2 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm sorry, it's a bunch of letters, I should say. And let's just see roughly about the timings. I need to widen this out at the end so I can see my T stroke. All right, so it looks a little slow to me. I'm going to speed this up just a little bit and see how that looks. Awesome. Okay, so that was fairly random. And again, we can always change those timings at the end. We just have to change all the mask timing, so it's probably good to get it right now. All right, great. So additionally, let me figure out where I want all my masks to be. and there's just a lot here, okay? So you can see that right here, as this comes up, it starts to reveal the rest of that there. So this is another thing that I need to mask off, okay? This is one of those overlap points. And again, I don't do this on my mat, I do this on the fill layer. I do this on the wheat layer in this case, all right? So what I would try to do here is, I'm gonna go one more frame, and I'm gonna try to figure out a nice clean angle for this, right? So it feels like it's kind of continuing this line here. And again, it didn't reveal my masks this time, so I'll press M, and there's my mask, and now I can change this to subtract, all right? So that looks pretty good. So it kind of like writes itself on there. Let's see, this is not my mask, this is just how it's happening, so I'm not gonna worry about that. So then when it gets here, okay, I'm gonna make a mask path, and I'm going to right click on this and make this a hold keyframe, and I'm just going to move this down to the beginning, okay? So then this is probably the frame where I needed to start moving off, is right there. So let me take my mask and select all the points of it. Oops, widen out here a little bit. And move this off, okay? And actually move this now off here. And now I've got another awkward like thing happening here, which is, let's see, this actually still needs a different mat until it gets around here. It's slightly awkward, okay? So I actually need, so this line is right here now, okay? So this little triangle here is a little bit premature. So what I could do is to take this frame, which is my mask, and just pull it down maybe one more frame. Let's see, if I move this off earlier, it's always confusing. So this is really the first frame where we should see the downstroke, and it should be getting around here. So what I could do is I could take my mask and have it move off on this frame. So it's like holding there until it gets there. And now I can make a new frame, a new mask rather, on this frame. And this is only going to probably be for this one frame. And it cuts this about here and cuts that shape off of it, right? So let me make this a subtract mask too. But that's sort of kind of cutting into this a little bit. So let me move this so it's not. So it's pretty much lined up in those two same points as the old mask, right? And let me make a mask path keyframe, clicking on that, and I'm gonna Option Command click on that so I can make it hold. Okay, so that's holding there. Pretty good. And when it gets here, that goes away. And then after this frame, this mask needs to now go away too. Though it does look like this should be cut around here maybe. So I could probably use this mask to try to fake this if I wanted. Oops. So let me grab the mask and move it all over about here, right? So now it looks like that. It's a little bit funny. I'm kind of like hand making this now, but I'm keeping the edge nice and clean, right? So now I can go here, and now this mask is definitely in the way, and I'll take this, and now I can move this off there, right? So again, I'm kind of hand making this a little bit, but here's what this is going to look like. Right? It goes fairly quickly, and you can kind of see that the mask, it kind of messes itself up a little bit here, which is kind of a shame. It kind of gives it this awkward cut, and that's probably because of my path here that I drew that's sort of cutting this in a funky way. So I could try to fix that later by making a mask or by filling this in a little bit with a little black shape here. This could be like a nice little cheat for there. But for now, I'm not going to worry about it, and I'll do those little finishing touches at the end, okay? So here's my first frame where I can see both of these overlaps here. So let me now do that thing that I do by selecting my wheat and not my mat, and choosing my pen tool. G is the shortcut. And let me cut this out here. Okay, let me do the same for this. I'm just trying not to reveal, oops, that there's a mask there. Getting that tightly fit, okay, and taking these both and making them subtract masks. Great. And now let me press M to show the mask paths of these. Great. And I'll select those and toggle, hold keyframe, and I can put those down to the beginning. Awesome. So they're ready to move. The first one's ready to go right there. Okay, so this would be the last frame of it. And so here I would take it, it's my red one, and this should work out pretty well just like the others, and I can just take this and move that off to the side here. Great, so it's there and then it's not there. And let me check on this one. When do I need to get rid of this? Is it, yep, is it there? Yep. So that's pretty good. Actually, I'll just have them both go away on the same frame right there. Move this over to the side. Okay, let's watch that down. Yeah, so you're starting to see the flow of that. And it feels right. It just feels good. I mean, it might be a little close to it, so it looks a little fast, and we might have to adjust those timings. But yeah, this is how I would do this, all right? And I know this lecture is getting a little bit long, so I'll try to do this as quickly as I can, but this is the kind of thing that just takes some time, all right? So here's my next little overlap area. So let me get in here, choose my pen tool and G, and cut these sections out. Okay, and I'll make that subtract. And I'll get over here and do the same thing with this one. Just try to make it a nice curve. And make that subtract. Okay, those look pretty good. A little flat, but whatever. Cool. And why don't I open this, make a mask path, open this, make a mask path, now press U. Okay, select both of those, Option, Command, click. Stick those down here at the beginning. And now the first frame, I need that one. Looks like this. Okay, that's my green mask, so I can take it. Let's just test it. Yep. Looks like it's fully loaded, so let me put that over there, and let me test this one as well. Let me make a mask path keyframe for there, and let me move this off. Yeah, actually, I think that that was probably where that moved as well. Let's check out what we got going on next, which is kind of this awful E and T that's coming up here, which we're going to need to do a lot of work on. So, okay, let's do this piece by piece. So this comes up and reveals kind of this thing here, which we don't want. We need to have some sort of elegant way of getting rid of this, which isn't going to be the easiest thing. So let's give it a shot with our pen tool and try cutting this out. So I'm going to click this here and get in close and kind of, we definitely need to figure out a way to make this look right. So let me go ahead and let me just try that at first and make this a subtraction mask. Okay. You see what I'm talking about? This is a bit of an awkward shape here. So, we're going to definitely need to do something with this so that it doesn't look too awkward. But nonetheless, it's probably going to look awkward no matter what we do for a second, all right? So hopefully it won't be too bad. If it looks terrible, we could try to do something else about that. But it's okay till about here. We also have another kind of issue that we're going to need to mask this out, and then this is the part of the T also is going to need to be masked out too, so we're going to do a bunch of cleanup work on here, okay? But my yellow mask for now, let me go ahead and make a keyframe for it, a mask path keyframe, and I will right click and hold keyframe and move this down to the beginning. Okay, and then let me move a couple more frames. So I really just need something that cleans this up for one frame here. This is kind of funny. So I just need to make a mask rather like that and make that subtraction. Okay, and let me make a mask path for it and Option Command click on it. And I just want that to be there for this one frame, and then when it goes here, I need this to move. So I'm going to select all parts of my mask, and I'll move that off. Right, so you get what I just did, I think. It just was to cover up that one little weird error that I was having there. So here, okay. Here looks like maybe the first frame where I need to start adjusting my yellow mask, which is blocking this. Okay, yeah. So this is now hitting this and cutting it, so that's definitely not where this needs to end. So let me grab some of these points and move these down. And it looks like this is already kind of hitting the edge of the E here. So this is where we're going to get into some trickiness. Okay, so we need this to kind of make sense for this frame. And right now, it's no longer really making sense. Like, it's good up until here, right? Up until this point. And, I'm sorry, up until this point, rather, here. In fact, if we move this up one, oops, I'm going to get rid of this for 1 sec. That was just a trial, okay? So I could theoretically, on this frame, take this and start adjusting it, okay? And, whoops, I don't want to do that. So I think this is probably fine there. And now here, this is really tricky. So if I get rid of the mask altogether, I get into this thing where it's dropped too much. So it's almost like I need a mask to continue this and cut this here. And then the next frame, it's like sweeping down. Or you could think of this as being cut right here, because there is this square edge right here. So I might be able to get away with making a mask. So maybe I just want a new mask here instead of trying to animate or, fiddle with this yellow mask. Okay, so let's just take this and put this over here. So that's done, right? And let's get in here now and just make a custom mask just for this one frame. I know it's complicated, but you'll see. I think this is the best way to do this. So somehow I need to cut this across this way till about here and then drop it down like that. Let's see what that looks like. And if I make this a subtraction mask. Oh, sorry. Wrong mask. If I make this a subtraction mask. Okay, so then it's like, oh, but I've cut, so tricky. I've cut too much out of this side of here. Okay. So this needs to be like this, I guess, for here. Yep. I guess that's fine. And then let me actually make a keyframe for this path. Make it a hold keyframe. And now here I need it to go away. Over here maybe. Or maybe one frame later. Ugh. So confusing. Even for me. Maybe that. Yeah, let's check that out. Don't worry about this little blit right there, okay? Yeah, not so bad. I mean, it's a little bit awkward with that shape, but at least we've made it all work. Yeah, it's not so bad. Not so bad. Okay, let's move on in any case, because this lecture is getting really long. So let me take this, and first let me fix that pesky T thing going on up there. So let me just kind of make a mask around this, and I'll make that a subtraction mask, and let me make a mask path for it, and Option and Command click on it, and make it a hold keyframe, move this up. So this basically needs to work until, okay, so this is now getting in its way right here. So I can edit this because this is just cutting out this one little thing. And okay, actually now I need to animate this mask because that T isn't supposed to be revealed yet. So I can take this and kind of pull this here and this something like that, right? So that kind of served a dual purpose, that mask. And let's see, when does it come around? It comes around about here. I think I can get rid of it. So let me take this and move this over and see when that actually really happens. I'm going to just move that keyframe up. Okay, it looks like right there is the first frame. So I'll take this, I'll move it the 1 up. Let's look at that. Okay, so not perfect, but the T-cross is fine now. We don't see it, and then... So this is our big problem right here. Sort of like the E was a little bit, okay? With this awkward thing there. That this line comes up and can't reveal that there. So let's see. The first frame where that becomes an issue is right here. Right? So let me back up 2 frames so it's all together in place. And actually, let me go all the way through this. That's fine. I just need this to now... So I'm going to select all these masks. I'm going to press U. Okay, that's a little bit smaller there. And, okay, so let me make a new mask now. Kind of talking to myself here. And I'll get in there and I'll cut this, you know, like that. A little bit of a curve on it. Okay, and make this subtract. It's a little awkward looking, but let's see what happens. And what I'll do is I'll make a mask path for that, and I will Option Command click and put this back down at the beginning. All right, so when do I need this to go away? It looks like this comes up and it's starting to move down. Oh, and I need a mask to cover that up as well. But around, let's see, certainly by here, I can have it gone because we can start to see it poking out. And what I could do actually is edit this mask down just so I could see a little bit more of the T, because I didn't need all this excess on here. And it looks like maybe this frame is the last one where I need the mask. So let me go ahead and just take this, select it, and move it off screen and see what that looks like there. So it's masked and then not. Maybe? Like a little awkward, but I might be able to live with it. Let's see. Well, you certainly get the nice down feeling, the up and then down from the T. So that's kind of important. And I like that. And for the sake of like moving this along here, so what I noticed is that this sticks out a little bit here, so I need to also get rid of this. Maybe like that. Make this subtract. Okay, and then at a certain point, obviously, I need to get rid of this. Let's see. Looks like actually... I was going to say, it looks like my T bar, the other one was coming a bit... Yeah, because I was getting this error in it there. So let me move this back 1 so that it's like that. Okay, and then this frame also is where my final T bar needs to disappear. So I'll make a hold keyframe, and here is the frame where I want it to disappear. So I will grab it and move it just over here. Okay, so then that should theoretically write itself on. Yep. Okay, so let's check that out. All right, I think this looks really great. I just want to do the exclamation point, and then I realize that this lecture is getting to be kind of long. We're almost to 2 hours, so I do want to wrap this up. So let's work on the exclamation point, and we'll be done. So I have the this layer, the original artwork that I made multiple copies of to create these other pieces, and now I just need this to be the exclamation point, so I do not need to duplicate this at all now, okay? But I do need to make my mat, which I'll add a trim path to. And I'm kind of thinking I was trying to think about this, like which way would the dot go first and then the line, or would the line go first and then the dot? And I kind of thought it might look more fun to move down. I'm not really sure the way I'd exactly write this, but I'm going to try it moving down. So I'm going to make my mat starting up here. And I'm just going to keep this really simple and just make it like that, something like that. And obviously just make sure the distance, the width of the stroke is just enough to cover it. Great, and let me rename this, and I'll call this my exclamation mat, and I will call this exclamation point, and I will move the mat on top of the layer that wants to fill into it, okay? Because mat always has to go on top, and fill always has to go on bottom. I know I've said that like 20 times now, so I hope that sunk in. And let me go ahead and find the alpha mat pull down for my exclamation point. Great, now I can see that. And let me go ahead and here's the end of my animation is here, right? With that pulling on, and we could even check the keyframes. Yep, looks like that one ends there. So let me go ahead and add a trim path to my mat for the exclamation point, right? And let's see, I want to animate, okay, it looks like this time I want to animate the start, sort of, or no, actually I want to animate the end. Always slightly confusing each time, but there you go. I want to animate it like that. Boom, right? So I'll start with the end at 0, and I'll make a keyframe, and I'll move forward like 10 frames or something, and we can check those timings later, obviously, and dial this down. And let's see what that looks like. Yeah. I think that looks really fun. I mean, this could probably be a little bit quicker or whatever, right? But other than that, I think that looks really fun. And like I said, this is getting a little bit long, so I do not want to make this lecture too long for you. So I think we're good. I think you understand this process really well, and it's time for you to move on to your homework, which is to animate the word awesome in the same font. And, I think this is a really good exercise for definitely working with trim paths, for understanding alpha mats, and for just in general learning how to write things on the screen, okay? So yeah, so try this out, and I hope it isn't too difficult for you. I think it shouldn't be, and enjoy yourself. Thank you very much.
If you had a microscope and could look at a piece of a leaf, you would see thousands of tiny openings which branch out until the leaf has all of the materials it needs. What happens now?